Just at dawn, the last boat docked on the right bank of the Vistula. The soldiers were carrying the wounded over the causeway and unloading equipment. I stopped at the water's edge and looked towards the bridgehead we had left. The river wave was lazily splashing at my feet. It was damp, smelling the first fresh leaves of the approaching fall. In the wary gloom of the coming morning, people, black with fatigue and gunpowder soot, wandered past alone and in groups, dazed, unfamiliar or hardly recognizable faces, and now and then the groans of the wounded were heard. Painfully, the heart clenched. How few of them were going! The pain of loss settled bitterly in his chest. Not immediately heard a hoarse voice behind his back. "What are you thinking about, combat?" I turned around. The regiment commander was looking at me with inflamed eyes, and obviously by my look understood a lot. He wanted to say something, but only with an effort swallowed the lump that came up. After the silence, asked, sighing heavily. "All from the left bank took out." "All of them. On the last flight I took the regimental telephonists." "No, thank you, Alexander Terentyevich." Valentin Yevstafievich cheered up. "They reported to me that they had forgotten 2 telephonists in their haste, and, as it happens, there was no communication with you. I'll have to send a special one. You've got the boats. You can send someone by swimming." And then I heard the shooting stopped. I wonder if Altunin was overpowered by the Krauts. I think he didn't have time to get away. I know I've left you in hell. I'll execute myself, but I couldn't make any other decision. "You shouldn't execute yourself, Comrade Major. The situation demanded to drink the cup of withdrawal to the end. And what could you help us with? Artillery? The material part of the regimental batteries was out of order at the bridgehead. The situation is no better in the artillery regiment and the fighter anti-tank division of the division. The order was to stand to the last man. So we all stood. So I had no illusions about help. I counted on the available forces and on the savvy of the men. Well, as you can see, we held out. Your orders have been carried out. Why am I talking like that girl?" Nothing. You need to lighten up, and you're saying all the right things." Major Pavliuk firmly, painfully shook my hand. "Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for everything. I see you are tired to the limit. Go get some rest." I do not remember what else Valentin Yevstafievich said. Somehow at once the tension subsided and fatigue replaced it. My body became full of lead, my feet burned with fire in my boots, my head was buzzing, and my eyes were filled with red smoke. Overcoming the weight, he searched for the tents, in which the soldiers and battalion commanders were already sleeping in a huddle. He dropped his head on someone's overcoat, closed his eyes. And almost immediately the bursts of explosions glittered in them. Something stuffy pushed into his shoulders and chest. Through the chaos of flashes, the screech of shrapnel and the whistle of bullets, he heard someone's tearing voices. The company man was killed. "There are wounded. Take the wounded out. They're dragging, sons of bitches, they're dragging. It's over, brothers." I want to remember whose voices it was, but I can't. Then the faces of Chugunov, Kovalev, Oshev, Maligin, Yeligin, Zatatnoy floated. Inflamed brain continued to live the past battles. I woke up because someone shook me by the shoulders and Comrade Captain, wake. I opened my eyes. Captain Zhezhnov was leaning over me. Vasily Antonovich had recently been appointed to replace Captain Bukharin. A knowledgeable officer, cheerful disposition, he quickly found his place in the battalion. Zhezhnov's face was clean-shaven. His eyes shone with joy. "You're sleeping well, Alexander Terentyevich. I could hardly wake you up. Captain Presniakov ran to headquarters, ordering to get you up by all means. We're good." "No way. My father's gathering the officers for the occasion. Wash up and go to the commander." Indeed, at the meeting at the regiment commander's office, we talked about our upcoming rest. A day later, the division was taken further to the rear. The units were located in the woods near the small Polish town of Menzek. Here we finally washed in a bathhouse, began to put our army household in order. We had a rest. After the rumble of battles, blood, gunpowder cinders, the autumn silence and blue sky seemed amazing. At night, the experience came back to many people again and again. Some screamed in their sleep, others jumped up and grabbed their weapons, others called the guys to attack. Gradually, the rear life became familiar to us. One day, the replenishment arrived, mostly experienced people. Nevertheless, we had more work to do. We had to distribute the newcomers by units. Each one had to find a position to his liking. All this took a lot of time and effort. We started training on forming departments. Due to the fact that the positions of junior commanders were mainly appointed soldiers who had distinguished themselves in past battles, much attention was paid to the leadership training of sergeants. The battalion held an open party meeting devoted to the experience of past battles. Veterans recalled battles with the enemy, talked about the steadfastness, savvy comrades gave examples of resourcefulness, initiative. The conversation was a good school for the soldiers and commanders who joined the team, helped us to summarize the best of the past battles and implement it in the practice of training. A memorable event of those days was the Army Order, which summarized the results of the August and September battles. For courage and bravery of the division was announced gratitude, expressed confidence that we Bryansk will continue to successfully solve the tasks of defeating the Nazi invaders. On this occasion a rally was held in the regiment. Speaking at it, participants of Fights Private Vasily Kiryash, Captain Nikolai Bukharin, Major Nikolai Kulyabin urged the youth to be equal to veterans, to continue to beat mercilessly the sworn enemy. The high evaluation of our military deeds was encouraging. Good news also contributed to the good mood. The regimental headquarters almost daily began to receive extracts from the orders on awarding soldiers who distinguished themselves in the battles. On one of the last days of September, we were at the commander's training at the division headquarters. Toward evening, fresh newspapers were brought to the tent. Officers reached for them. As usual, first we read the reports of the Sovinform Bureau, and suddenly someone's excited exclamation. "My brothers, look, Altunin has been given a hero." "No way," the audience murmured. "Where? Show me? Really?" In an instant I found myself in the arms of my friends. Someone almost to my very eyes brought a newspaper. Read it. Read it out loud. I was looking for my name in the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, and the lines were jumping before my eyes. "What are you doing first? Look to Captain Altunin Alexander Terentievich. There can be no mistake." The joyful voices of his colleagues were interrupted by Bukharin's bass. "Guys, let me give him a hug. After all, a former commander." Nikolai Yakovlevich finally got to me. He hugged and kissed me, wishing me every success. The deputy commander of the rifle battalion, Captain Ivan Sergeyev, squeezed me in a bear hug. "Guys, here is Pavlyuk's surname. Maybe there is someone else from our Bryansk waterproof. Look, the scout yoga is here too." Comrades, commanders, co-workers congratulated me several days in a row. In memory remained warm farewells Fyodor Fyodorovich Abashev, Peter Grigorievich Evego, Valentin Evstafievich Pavlyuk, Nikolai Afanasyevich Kulyabin, Nikolai Sergeyevich Modin, Major General Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky. Read a letter from my father, unfolded the soldier's triangle and ran his eyes over the uneven lines of the message. My father wrote, "This morning the battalion commander called me. I arrived, reported to the commander in all forms. He comes to me, extends his hand, asks, 'Terenti Dmitrievich, do you have a son, Alexander?' 'That's right,' I said. 'I do. He commands a battalion in the 1st Ukrainian Captain. He's a new commander. He's been here for 2 weeks. The old one knew you from our meeting in Belarusia. He kept asking how you were doing. This one hasn't studied all the men yet.' I say, and my heart started to race, my legs became leaden. No way with such a trouble, I think. And the combatant smiled and said, 'So, our neighbor.' 'Well, why are you procrastinating? Talk faster. Not then you specifically called me to ask about my son. No, not for that. There is something else here.' Tens apparently noticed my condition, hastened to reassure me. 'But you do not worry, Terenti Dmitrievich. No trouble has happened. But I have joy for you.' And what a joy! He unfolded the newspaper and handed it to me with the words, 'Your son, Terenti Dmitrievich, was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Here is the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. Read it.' So I took the newspaper and my hands were shaking. This is not good. An old soldier calms me, the commander and his adjutant orders. Nens and a mug here. Yes, canned food open. Quickly. He poured me a full mug, serves me with the words, 'Drink to the son, hero, father. It's not often that people are honored with the highest distinction of the motherland.' And I stood there silent, only shrugging my shoulders. He saw it in his own way. 'Permission granted,' he said. 'Terenti Dmitrievich, go ahead. You're a good soldier too, don't drag it out.' So I drank it, and only then I came to my senses. 'I congratulate you, Sasha, with the highest military distinction.' That was the first congratulatory letter from my relatives. On September 28, 44th, I was awarded the next military rank of major. At the beginning of October, the party activity of the division was held. The conversation was about the growth of the party ranks. During the past battles, party organizations of regiments, battalions, companies much reduced. Suffice it to say that in our regiment, there were only 78 communists out of more than 200 at the beginning of forcing the Vistula. True, the party layer increased due to members and candidates for membership in the All-Union Communist Party who arrived as part of the last replenishment. However, for the creation of full-blooded company party organizations of communists was clearly not enough. We have a base of growth, noted in the report of the head of the political department. And what a base! In the regiments, battalions and companies, many soldiers, sergeants and officers who have repeatedly shown themselves in battles with the Nazi invaders. However, they are still outside the party, although we know them well. Why is this happening? Because we do not find time to work with them, to help them prepare to join the All-Union Communist Party. Peter Zavago named our battalion among the units, where the growth of the party ranks is the most unfavorable. We made conclusions with the deputy commander. Secretaries of party organizations of the department and companies began to pay more attention to the preparation of advanced soldiers to join the party. We knew that the rear life at any time could end, and our first Ukrainian would come into motion, though, however, it did not stand still. The troops of the 38th Army, together with the units of the 1st Czechoslovak Corps, had captured the Duklinek Pass on October 6 and were now marching through the territory of Czechoslovakia. The troops of the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian, Leningrad, Karelian, Baltic and Byelorussian fronts successfully crushed the Nazi invaders. Now along the whole line from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, the war was going on the territory of neighboring countries. The final collapse of Hitler's regime was approaching. Only on the territory of Latvia and Lithuania there were still troops of the Fascist Army Group North. We continued to be in reserve. Here we celebrated the 27th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. Reading the lines of the Order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, we were proud of the successes of the Soviet Army on the fields of the Great Patriotic. The order called to finish the enemy in his own lair. On the eve of the October holiday, there was a regimental exercise. Perhaps it would be possible not to remember about it, but it is connected with an important for my future fate conversation. In commander of the division, Colonel Fyodor Fyodorovich Abashev, and the Chief of Staff of the division, Colonel Pyotr Evgenyevich Davidov, asked me to stay for a while. Abashev inquired, "Aren't you tired of commanding a battalion, Alexander Terentievich?" "No, not at all," I answered hastily. He's so hot. The Chief of Staff of the division didn't let me finish. Straight fire. "We are talking to you because you have gained experience and now you can handle more difficult tasks. Major Pavlyuk wants to take you as a deputy." Without further hesitation, explained Abashev. "You don't stray far from your battalion. What's your opinion?" There was nothing to think about. I agreed. This preliminary conversation ended. On November 4, I was appointed deputy commander of the regiment. A new position, new worries, and with it responsibility. In the second half of November, the deputy commander, Major Kuliabin, left the regiment for training. Parting in the army is not uncommon, especially in the front situation. Just get used to a person, as fate separates. The reasons, of course, are different, but whatever they are, you always regret. You get used to a comrade, and the front life is truly kindred. With Nikolai Afanasyevich, I had many things in common. Becoming a commander, fighting on the bridgehead, when the line between life and death almost disappeared. To say that he was a fearless man would be wrong. Kolyabin, like all of us, bowed to the ground when mines and shells burst, did not expose himself to bullets. But another thing, he was not lost in the complex vicissitudes of battle, was able to instill confidence in us. Admittedly, I was sorry to part with him, although we were not personal friends. For a long time I will remember his advice on the roads of war. Meanwhile, the 44th year was coming to an end. On the evening of December 31st, a fresh snowball fell. Everything around was dressed in a white, fluffy outfit. The sky cleared, a light frost hit. In the forest breathed easily and freely. There was silence and peace all around. I couldn't believe it. I stopped at a spruce tree, which dropped its spreading branches under the weight of snow, and involuntarily thought it was just like in Siberia. Again I remembered my father's home, my native land. My heart ached. There had been no letters from his mother for a long time. Has something happened? He tried to put the thought out of his mind, but it would not go away. So there you are, lost soul. I heard a voice behind me. I turned around. On the path came to me Chief of Staff Major Nikolai Sergeyevich Mudin. We grabbed you, and you're not here. New Year's table is waiting. Let's go get something to eat. We still need to congratulate people, and according to the schedule today, we have a concert of amateur art. With Nikolai Sergeyevich, I established good friendly relations, although before, when I commanded the battalion, they could not be called cool. Responsive in character, Modin always came to the rescue, but demanded from us, battalion commanders, accuracy in the execution documents and the timeliness of their presence. True, not everyone liked the meticulous pedantry of the Chief of Staff of the regiment, but we had to reckon with it. But afterwards, more than one of us, young officers, thankfully remembered this man. Modin knew the soldier's life well. Junior commander went through the Finnish campaign. Patriotic met an officer, commanded a company of machine gunners, more than once brilliantly solved problems. He was doctor's recommended staff work. Accustomed from childhood to work, he quickly got used to the new place. He was promoted to the post of Chief of Staff of the regiment. He understood our commander's worries and not once defended us, as they say, diverted the anger of his superiors. He was a demanding, punctual, but fair chief. Let's go, Nikolai Sergeyevich. I took Modin under the elbow. On this New Year's Eve night, we raised the invariable 100 grams for our final victory, remembered our battle friends and comrades who remained on the front lines, and attended a concert. On January 5, in the afternoon, from the division headquarters came the order to prepare for the march. By the end of January 7, the regiment concentrated in the vicinity of the city of Sandomir. By this time, despite the fact that the enemy managed to dislodge some of our units from the western bank of the Vistula, Sandomir bridgehead was about 70 kilometers wide and up to 60 in depth. As it became known some time later, the front command decided to start the upcoming operation from here, the name of which on the staff maps and in the relevant papers has already been designated Vistula Oder Strategic. And here, observing all measures of camouflage, mainly in the dark time of day, troops were pulled together to strike the enemy. Here at Sandomir, there was an incident which cannot be forgotten, because it served as a good lesson for everyone in the regiment. One evening, the regimental headquarters received a call from neighbours asking to pick up a soldier who was trying to cross the front line. The message was surprising. An emergency. And what an emergency. It's been a long time since something like this happened. Alexander Terentievich, asked Major Pavliuk, deal with the soldier. Find out maybe a man lost his way? The regiment commander was in a hurry to the meeting at the division headquarters. He began to find out. The battalion commander answered the call with a sigh. Yachens underdog, we are suffering with this soldier. One thing or another, now he's pulled a new trick. I think there's no intent. Still, I decided to personally go to the neighbours. I brought the soldier. The soldier looked really unattractive, not tall, with an inexpressive, even at first glance silly face in a wrinkled overcoat, in beaten, not cleaned boots for a long time. The only thing that attracted attention was his shoulders, straight and broad. He answered questions confusedly, and every now and then interrogated. What do you want from me? I am illiterate. However, in his answers there was a wariness. I shared my doubts with Captain Obukov, an operative. Alexander Vasilievich was interested in the soldier, and the next day he told me, Alexander Terentievich, but your doubts are confirmed. He is not the man he claims to be. We're checking it now. Obukov hurried off on his business, and in the evening the news. A soldier escaped from under guard. He asked to go to the toilet. He came out with a letter of marginalization, went inside. The guard stayed waiting. After some time I called the arrested. Silence. I tore the door. Inside was empty, and there was a hole in the back wall. I had to follow the fugitive through the surrounding farms until he was caught. The spy was dealt with according to the laws of war team. By the sentence of the military tribunal he was shot. This case once again reminded us all of the need for daily vigilance. Meanwhile, the preparation for the upcoming breakthrough of enemy defences every day became more tangible. Officers from division and course headquarters began to visit the regiment more and more. They were interested in literally everything, starting from the equipment of soldiers and end with the cohesion of platoons, companies, battalions. The division held classes with regimental commanders and their deputies. We practiced the offensive in densely populated areas and cities. Derived order to prepare assault battalions. The case is not new. Practice we had in experienced officers and sergeants was not lacking. In the regiment, the choice fell on the battalion of Captain Bukharin. I informed Nikolai Yakovlevich about it. He took the news as a matter of course, clarified what means of reinforcement we give him, when to begin to cluster. We'll start today, Nikolai Yakovlevich. Artillerymen, mortarmen and sappers will arrive in the afternoon. Get ready for the drill. The battalion tactical exercise with live firing took place 3 days later. I had to act as a leader. I was pleased with the skill of the soldiers. Officers and sergeants skillfully led their subordinates, quickly reacted to changes in the situation. Seeing behind the shoulders of the vast majority of them was a huge combat experience. Except for some minor roughnesses, the battalion showed a high level of training. Division headquarters daily demanded information from us about classes, activities on party political work, hurried with the completion of exercises. We did not know then that the Supreme Command headquarters, in connection with the difficult situation of the Allies in the Ardennes, revised the date of the offensive operation. Consequently, the time, both at the higher headquarters as well as at us, was compacted to the limit. The commander of our front, Marshal of the Soviet Union, is Konev, characterized the area of the upcoming battles. We had to pass from the Vistula to the Oder to a depth of up to 500 kilometers. The enemy had prepared in advance on this way 7 defensive strips. Most of them were along the banks of the rivers Nida, Pilika, Water, Oder, which were barriers in themselves. Behind the enemy's back was there was no choice left. To fail to resist meant signing one's own death warrant. On January 12, the rumble of cannonade announced the beginning of the offensive. Artillery shells were so strong that even at us, 15 kilometers from the front line, muffled tinkling of glass in the windows of the house. And what was it like there, in the camp of the enemy, where the deadly load fell? 270, 300 barrels per kilometer of the front, not counting small caliber cannons and mortars. That was the density of artillery fire managed to create in the places of the breakthrough. Our army has become strong, very strong. In the 41st and 42nd, I remember we, company commanders, considered each attached 40-50 as a great help in defense and offensive. Now 57mm and 76mm guns have replaced them in the regiment, and how many automatic weapons became. It's hot for the Krauts. Major Pavliuk nodded towards the front line. Despite the early morning, the officers of the headquarters were on their feet and in the units, judging by the calls, did not sleep, although the night before Major Pavliuk ordered to give more time to rest personnel. The artillery cannonade brought the men to their feet on this cloudy morning. At last, the long-awaited day had come, a new breakthrough to Berlin, a step towards the victory with which each of us had dreams. We rejoiced and, without exaggeration, were eager to fight. Time passed in anxious and joyful expectation of news from the front line. A short January day rolled into the sunset when the regiment commander arrived from the meeting from the division headquarters. By Pavliuk's glittering eyes, it was easy to guess that Valentin Yevstafevich had arrived with good news. Major Modin gathered the officers of the headquarters. "I congratulate you, comrades, on your success," began Major Pavliuk. "The first echelon of our Third Guards broke through the enemy defences. According to the received information, the neighbouring armies are also successfully moving forward. The division commander sent to be in readiness." The voice of the regiment commander interrupted the phone call. Major Pavliuk picked up the phone. As Valentin Yevstafevich listened to the caller, his face took on a concerned expression. "I see." Finally, he hung up the phone and looked at us. "Well, comrades, in an hour we'll be on the road." The regiment met the dawn on the road. On the sides of the road, in the fields, forest edges and glades, we could see broken enemy equipment. I will allow myself one small digression, characterizing the power of our blow from the Sandomir bridgehead, which to some extent influenced the course and outcome of subsequent events, and at the same time the actions of individual army formations, including directly our division. I mean the words of Hitler's General Kurt Tippelskirch in his book History of World War II, relating to January 12, the day of the breakthrough. The blow was so strong that overturned not only the divisions of the first echelon, but also quite large mobile reserves, pulled up by Hitler's categorical order very close to the front. The latter suffered losses already from the artillery preparation of the Russians, and later, as a result of the general retreat, they could not be used at all according to the plan. Deep indentations into the German front were so numerous that it was impossible to eliminate them, or at least to limit them. Forward corps and divisions of our army, on the first day deeply cut into the German defence, continued to move forward, sweeping away the resistance of the Nazis on their way. Unkilled fascist units left to the second echelons. The enemy troops that appeared in our rear were concentrated in forests and woods, in rather large groups under the leadership of experienced and decisive officers. Such groups posed a serious danger to those who moved after the advanced formations and units. Fascist units were on métier, had at their disposal tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery, which with a branched network of highways in the area gave them the opportunity for wide manoeuvre. A large group of the enemy was between Warsaw and Sandomir. The front troops left the village almost untouched. Already on the second day of the breakthrough, the fascists began to make themselves known on the right flank of the division. Breaking through, the Nazis fought desperately. They were gripped by fear caused by Goebbels' propaganda, shouting that the Russians would come and would leave no stone unturned from Germany, and all the population would be taken to Siberia. In the area of Bialokow, the Medical Sanitary Battalion and rear units of the 149th Rifle Division got in the way of the retreating Nazi mechanized column. They were literally wiped out by fire and tracks. The enemy managed to occupy the city. The Corps Command took urgent measures. Reinforced battalions from our 828th Vladimir Volinsky Rifle regiments were thrown in front of the Hitlerites who broke through. All night there was a battle for Bialokso. Artillerymen, anti-tank gun crews were burning tanks, assault guns, armoured personnel carriers of the enemy. Mortars, machine gunners were destroying German infantry. The enemy was rushing like a hunted animal, looking for a way out of the situation, but everywhere ran into our harsh rebuff. From complete destruction of the enemy was saved by a new fascist mechanized group that appeared near the town of Zakurzua. For its defeat we had to throw some of the forces at our disposal. This was used by the surrounded Hitlerites. They managed to crush a platoon of anti-tank rifles and machine gunners at the junction of two battalions. However, few managed to escape. How difficult it was for us. You can judge at least by the number of the enemy. Only in Bialokso and Zekersdusky groups of the breakthrough troops there were more than 10,000 armed Hitlerites. And not only fear pushed the fascists to desperate resistance. It should be said that the sunset of the Third Empire saw still far from all Germans, and even the difficult situation so far made few changes in the nature of the actions of the Hitler soldier on the battlefield. He continued to fight as before. A noticeable rise in spirits, judging by the testimony of prisoners, caused in the German army offensive operation in the Ardennes. Fascist soldiers and officers believed the rumours diligently fanned by propaganda that after the defeat of our allies, the German command will throw forces from all fronts against the Soviet Union. The regiment almost never left the battle. Companies, battalions, specially formed detachments were constantly on the move. Today they strike in one place, tomorrow in another. It was necessary to have time to cross the fascists' escape routes, to dismember, to liquidate or capture in pieces. This is not an easy task. The enemy units, I repeat, were perfectly equipped with equipment and weapons. They were led by experienced officers. The enemy troops moved at night. Each of the columns had tanks, self-propelled guns, mortars, well-armed infantry. One of such groups of Hitlerites broke through to the location of the command post of the regiment. At that time there was the 2nd Battalion and a battery of 76mm guns. We met the enemy with dense fire. The thought troubled us. The forces are not enough, and we have the banner of the regiment with us. Major Pavliuk turned to the Chief of Staff NS Modin. The forces are not enough, and we have the regimental banner. Best save the banner. Retreat to the reserve battalion. We'll manage here ourselves. Officers, signallers, anti-tank gun crews, riflemen destroyed enemy infantry and tanks. The enemy attack was repulsed. The 828th Vladimir Volinsky Rifle Regiment, together with the 418th Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Division in the area of Dorobna-Volia, fought with the enemy mechanized group for several hours in a row. If other parts of the division had not come to the aid of the Krasovci, it would have been difficult to stop the enemy. The fight against the enemy groups that broke through was carried out not only by our and neighbouring divisions, but also by tankers of Lieutenant General I.P. Korkagin. More than once we had to smash the enemy together with them. The fascists fiercely resisted, in many places counterattacked, but we could not hold back the pressure. Hitlerites, though not so fast as we would like, but they retreated back, and in some places fled, throwing equipment and weapons. Fight, march, fight again. This was the order in which we were advancing to the Oder. Suitable cars, motorcycles, wagons were adapted by the commanders of the units for the transfer of personnel, ammunition, property, and equipment. In these days I especially remember the march to the area of Boshkov. The regiment was advancing on muddy dirt roads. The mercury had jumped to the plus mark. Wet snow was falling. The division command was in a hurry. The cars were slipping on the ascents, getting stuck. The Heavenly Office had to be remembered with a bad word more than once. Right from the march together with other units on the night of January 28, we entered the battle for the town of Kreben. The main burden of the fight fell on us. The second half of the night and the morning of January 29, battalions supported by artillery stormed the city quarters. The advance was slow. Hitlerites fought for every quarter street house. Now and then we had to put on direct aim. Hours to the pity, I found myself in Bukharin's battalion. The commander was giving orders in a hoarse voice. Seeing me, he smiled happily. At that time, an enemy machine gunner, who was lying on the roof of a mansion across the street, fired at the windows of the upper floor of the building at which we were standing. Glass spattered, plaster mixed with wood splinters. Bukharin grimaced, as if from a toothache, nodded toward the firing point. Well, what can you do with it? There's nothing to take, and the cannoneers have fallen behind. Yes, it's bad. Do you know why the artillerymen are stuck? They're short of men. We've had a lot of casualties in the last few days. Give them a hand. That's right, though I don't have many men left. Nikolai Yakovlevich ordered to help the artillerymen. Soon 2 guns arrived. The crews quickly dealt with the enemy machine gun, began to cover the assault groups moving forward. 1 gun was firing at the Hitlerites. The other was moving to a new firing position. Advancement of the battalion went more vigorously. Well, Nikolai Yakovlevich, it seems that things are moving. How come you didn't realize it yourself? Or are you getting stingy? Doesn't sound like you. Bukharin lowered his eyes and spread his hands. In the turmoil, I missed it. At noon, the last groups of the enemy ceased resistance. The city was in our hands. In the streets began to appear inhabitants. Poles looked with interest at the soldiers and commanders, but by habit continued to huddle against the walls of the houses. Years of fear in the occupation made themselves felt. However, seeing the friendly looks of our soldiers and officers, they became brave and entered into conversations. The following episode is connected with Krebeny in my memory. On the way from Bukharin's battalion to the regimental headquarters, I turned to the firing position of the regimental mortars. Batterymen were carrying people out of a burning building. Almost all of them were wearing military uniforms. I involuntarily remembered the 41st year, a barn on fire in a sun-drenched meadow, and the cries of wounded German paratroopers who tried to burn, leaving their own paratroopers. So the war still hasn't taught everyone. Civilized obscurantists, said Vasily Ponomarev rudely. Murderers, damn them. This was not the only incident that day. It turns out that on the orders of the command, the SS poured gasoline on buildings with the wounded and set them on fire. We didn't stay in Kreben for long. The regiment marched towards Frauenstadt. During the night it snowed, but by 8 o'clock it cleared up. A light frost cheered up the men. Battalion columns marched towards the cannonade of battle. Everyone was in high spirits. Sovinform Bureau brought glad tidings from the fronts. The capital of Poland, Warsaw, large industrial centres Lodz, Krakow were liberated. The troops of our front reached the Oder River and captured several bridgeheads, surrounded a large group of the enemy in Pomerania. With joy we accepted the news of the Soviet troops' entry into the territory of fascist Germany. The long-awaited retribution came. The fire of war returned to the place where it was lit. The division continued to fight on the outskirts of the Oder. They were held on the rare persistent, and on the heat of the struggle is difficult to distinguish them one from the other. The Germans used the densely populated area to create pockets of resistance in cities and towns. The walls of stone buildings reliably concealed the enemy, were convenient for the device of firing points. We countered the strength of the walls and the persistence of the enemy with the skill of commanders and a variety of fighting technique. It should be said that our officers of company, battalion, and most of the regimental level were wartime commanders. Many of our officers grew up from soldiers. They had more than one brilliantly conducted battles. The war contributed to their promotion to command positions, and the situation on the front line, battles, to the acquisition of experience, commanding skills. Mostly they were masters of their craft. In the course of the story I have repeatedly recalled Captain Sergeyev. I will add that Ivan Alexievich started the war in a rifle company. He proved to be a strong-willed officer. He was appointed commander of a company of machine gunners. Here, as they say, all facets of his commanding talent shone. Where courage, initiative, determination were required, he was sent. It is necessary to break through the long-term defense of the enemy. The first were automatki, to cut off the ways of the enemy's withdrawal or bypass it. In the Dorotkin bridgehead, Captain Sergeyev became deputy battalion commander. He quickly mastered his new position. Already in the course of the Vistula Ota operation, more than once he solved the tasks of liquidation of groups of fascists breaking through to the front. In the area of the Polish farm Shabani, fascists managed to break through the regiment's fighting order and rushed in the direction of the division CP. In a critical situation, the group consisting of a rifle company, artillery and mortar platoons, sapper section under the command of Sergeyev was thrown in front of the enemy with the task to stop the enemy. He had not enough forces on hand. Hitlerites outnumbered the group several times. At the disposal of the enemy, tanks, assault guns, armoured personnel carriers, armoured fist, and helped them to break through the ring of encirclement. Moving towards the enemy, the officer picked up a piece of terrain. A forested gully began. 1.5 kilometers later its neck began to narrow, became steeper slopes. Birches and lindens closely approached the highway. The captain decided to block the narrowest place. While sappers mined the highway, pruned trees, infantrymen helped artillery crews to raise guns on the slopes, to clear for them sectors of fire, to equip firing positions. Sergeyev positioned the anti-tank gun crews under cover of hand machine guns, so that about 300 meters of the roadbed were in the crosshairs. The mortars were to block the way of fascist withdrawal with their fire. Sergeyev's calculation was justified. The fascist mechanized column was moving without a guard. The Hitlerites, who had broken out of the encirclement, had no time for that. They were trying to get away from the pursuit faster. The lead tank hit a mine and exploded. The tank that followed him started to go around and also twisted on a place with a broken track. And then the guns hit the enemy fighting machines. Another tank caught fire. A self-propelled vehicle burst into flames. 2 armoured personnel carriers collided and fell into the roadside ditch. A traffic jam was created on the narrow forest road. Tracked vehicles were prevented from turning by trees. They were forced to pitch the sides of the artillerymen and armoured gunners. The German infantry came under machine gun fire from the rifle platoons. The flames devoured the vehicles, and shrapnel and bullets mowed down the men. The battle lasted no more than 40 minutes. About 6 combat vehicles the enemy lost at the scene of the battle. Several tanks, assault guns, and armoured personnel carriers were delivered to Captain Sergeyev safe. This is the result of this unequal in strength, but won by intelligence and courage of the battle. Sergeyev's report that the broken-through fascist mechanized group ceased to exist did not surprise us. Reports of the defeat of superior enemy forces in these days we received quite often, and often were themselves participants in it. I remember the engineer of the regiment, Captain Otpushchenikov. Ivan Stepanovich grew up in the regiment from platoon commander to chief of service. Knew sapper work, had high organizational skills. We, commanders of rifle units, more than once said thank you to him for his help in accomplishing combat tasks. In any German mines, Otpushchenikov perfectly understood. His subordinates were like him. In assault group, sappers set the tone for the riflemen. Perfectly knew his business, and Chief of Communications Lizitsyn, in difficult situations, had to fight the regiment, but the connection was always stable. Konstantin Vasilievich, before becoming Chief of Communications of the regiment, went through a good school in the positions of platoon commander company. Not once under artillery fire, machine gun fire of the enemy went to the line. To match the officers of the platoon and company were junior commanders. Sergeants and petty officers had a rich practical experience. Some of them were confirmed as platoon commanders before the primary officer rank. Platoon of regimental reconnaissance was headed by Petty Officer Peter Blokin. commanded just great. The scouts successfully coped with the tasks near Dubrava, during the pursuit of the enemy retreating to the western Bug and Vistula on the Dorotkin bridgehead, where Blokin received the military rank of junior lieutenant. At the Dorotkin bridgehead, Petty Officer Ivan Korolkov replaced the company commander who had fallen out of service. The unit under his leadership successfully solved the task. Korolkov was awarded an order for skillful leadership of the unit in battle. It's well proven themselves as platoon commanders Sergeant Innocent Ivanov, Sergeants Fedor Kandorov, Timofey Shaley, and other junior commanders. In short, we had someone to fulfill combat tasks with. The regiment did not lack weapons, ammunition, and equipment. On the last day of January, the division stormed Frauenstadt. Over the city blocks hung smoke, red tile dust. Continuously fired artillery. Well worked our aviation. The weather finally settled down. The thaw, wet snow was replaced by clear days with a little frost. However, attempts to move forward had no success. The enemy every time met the battalion chains with devastating artillery and machine gun fire. Winter twilight imperceptibly turned into night. It snowed, fluffy and dry, which is only at the height of winter. After rounding the front line, we gathered at the CP. The mood was below average, although we tried not to give away our feelings from what we had just seen. People were lying in hastily dug slits, huddled against fences and walls of rare buildings of the suburb, on which the fascists were firing artillery. Suddenly the door of the dugout opened. From the dark opening sounded someone's voice. "Division Commander." A creak of snow was heard, and together with new clouds of frosty air, Colonel Kantaria stepped into the dugout. Ivan Grigorievich had recently arrived in the division, but had already managed to gain respect. Energetic, hot, desperately brave. He was decisive and fast. He did not tolerate slowness. He said hello briefly, asked with a Georgian accent. "What will you please us with?" Seeing our bewildered faces, he shook his head. "And I thought that you must have figured out the best way to take this female city." "Another you. Frauenstadt, Comrade Colonel." Major Pavlik stood up. "Of course. Frauenstadt, be damned. He's as tough as any other woman. But there must be an approach, mustn't there?" "Of course there should, Comrade Colonel. Allow me to report my thoughts." Well. The Colonel raised his black eyebrows. "Let's have it. Until we cut the highways north of the city. The Germans will hold on." "Reasonable, Kantaria clucked his tongue. "As they say in the Caucasus, a long harness is good, but a short speech is good. The enemy is bringing reinforcements along these roads, but how to reach them unnoticed? At night, we'll maneuver around and ride the roads." "Map?" The commander looked at it for a while. Red pencil drew a line of the detachment and, looking at us, "To whom do you entrust?" "Captain Bukharin," Major Pavliuk answered. "Give the battalion a battery of guns?" "I don't mind. I was reported to me about him. The commander is reliable. The general leadership will be Altunin," nodded in my direction Valentin Evstafievich. "Then it's quite good. Prepare people." Komdiv stayed with Pavliuk and Modin. I went to the battalion of Captain Bukharin. The snowfall that had begun had turned into a snowstorm, which was now blizzarding angrily and gustily. I thought to myself, the blizzard has gone wild for no good reason. In such a wind it will be bad for the people who are tired during the day. They will freeze to the bones, but there was nothing to do. An order is an order. It is not discussed, but carried out. By my arrival, the battalion had already started preparing for the march. A soldier escorted me to the commander. Capital Bukharin and Adjutant Senior were working on "We are studying the route of advancement, Alexander Terentievich." Bukharin came up to meet me. By the revitalized faces of the commander and the adjutant of the senior battalion, it was easy to guess that they were pleased with my arrival. Reporting on the work done, Bukharin called me commander by old habit. "No, Nikolai Yakovlevich, you are the commander here. I don't intend to take the reins from you. You're in command." I forgot my mother. Nikolai Yakovlevich clapped on the gallif and smiled disarmingly. We discussed the route of advance, checked the readiness of people. There was not enough ammunition. I reported my opinion to Pavliuk. Valentin Yevstafevich went to meet us. At the regimental warehouse were received cartridges, grenades, mines, shells. Food workers gave the fighters extra food. At midnight, the battalion came out. Frost spurred people, rough tongues of snow licked noses and cheeks. In the sky dimly glowed cascades of rockets along the front line. From time to time, the enemy's batteries gave their voices. Alternately, the machine guns on duty clattered deafeningly. "No need for guides," me smiled Bukharin. "Yes, you won't get lost. The Krauts are nervous, afraid of what might happen." Battalion bypassing Frauenstadt at 6 o'clock in the morning came to the roads converging to the city. In the pre-dawn hour, the highways were deserted. Only the snow drifted slowly across the dark asphalt. "Oh, they are not waiting for us here," the commander turned to me. "Clearly not waiting for us." Nikolai Yakovlevich began to give orders leisurely, clearly. Rifle companies were to take a circular defense and prepare to repel the enemy. Artillery battery began to equip firing positions on a small hill, allowing to fire in almost all directions. In his reserve, Bukharin left a company of anti-tank guns. Now we had to wait for dawn, and with it, and the main events. To the regimental headquarters with a report sent liaisons. By 7 o'clock the wind began to subside. The frost increased. Units continued to entrench. Fighters of the company of anti-tank guns equipped MP shelters for the wounded. The engineering works were progressing quite rapidly, despite the frozen ground. The old-timers, who had passed the fiery hell of the bridgehead, knew the value of land in a soldier's life and, setting an example for the newcomers, were eager to dig in quickly. There was no need to rush anyone. Officers organized the system of fire. It was necessary to link the interaction of rifle companies with artillerymen, mortars, Peterovci, not to forget about dead spaces, especially since we had to rely only on the available forces. For artillerymen and mortars recommended Bukharin to prepare simultaneously the main and reserve firing positions. Nikolai Yakovlevich shrugged his shoulders in surprise. "We won't have time, Alexander Terentivich. We must have time. We should open fire from the reserve positions. When the enemy detects them and starts to deploy, to transfer guns and mortars to the main positions, and from them to continue firing, creating a false idea in the Germans about the saturation of our defense artillery." We were in a hurry. The sky was about to turn blue and dawn would come into its own. Soon we hurried with thermoses to the camp kitchens of the petty officers. Combat ordered to quickly feed people. From the direction of the city came the voice of guns. The fire was conducted by divisions of the Art Regiment. Preparation for the assault front state began. Listening to the rumble of explosions. From time to time we looked at the road. The assumption was soon justified. In the pre-dawn gloom we heard the rumble of engines. Then appeared a column of trucks with enemy soldiers. Letting in a direct shot, the artillery opened fire on them. Several vehicles overturned in ditches and caught fire. The German infantry began to hastily deploy. Then mortars hit it. The Nazis rushed back in disorder, leaving their weapons on the fresh. More and more fires appeared on the highway. Ammunition began to burst in the burning bodies. The neighborhood shook with explosions. This went on for about half an hour. Then the rumbling began to gradually subside. The flames of the fires went out. The surviving fascist infantry moved back and gave no signs of life. The same fate befell the enemy artillery column, marching to the aid of the garrison Frauenstadt on the second highway. Howitzer division of the enemy turned into a pile of burning metal. The calculations that tried to escape, having fallen under the gun and machine gun fire of rifle companies, were also destroyed. Capture of highways played an important, if not the main, role in the mastery of the city. The command of the Nazi garrison, hearing the rumble of battle in their rear, hurriedly sent a reconnaissance. German motorcyclists were met by machine guns and mostly exterminated. Only a few machines managed to turn around and go back. The scouts' report increased the panic in the garrison, which we had also counted on. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the city was taken. The fascists lost a lot of tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery, mortars. Over 200 soldiers and officers surrendered as prisoners. The commander of the division announced us a commendation. In the events of those days, I want to emphasize, in the fourth year of the war we took for granted the fulfillment of such tasks, which before would have been incredibly difficult, almost impossible. Inclination into the enemy's combat orders, detours, covering the nodes of his resistance, strikes on the flanks and rear, imposing his will became common in the tactics of our commanders. On the organization of the battle now took 2 or even 3 times less time than before, and the issues were solved incomparably better. Officers, sergeants, soldiers were the true masters of the battlefield. It was impossible to wrest the initiative from them. even if the enemy had superiority in strength and means. Beat the enemy not by numbers but by skill. This Suvorov's principle was firmly embedded in the practice of combat operations. At the small German town of Zerbo, the regiment took the combat section of the 127th Infantry Division. Battalions attacked the enemy positions from the start. The Nazis met our chains with dense fire. It turned out that storming a populated area without reliable artillery support was a futile endeavour. Unfortunately, except for regimental and battalion artillery, we had no other artillery means at our disposal. Searching for the division commander to transfer artillery regiment divisions to us was a waste of time. We had to find a way out. "Let's bypass Zabao," Ni suggested Pavlyuk. "To block the garrison, leave a battalion. Scouts report that on the right and left of the city of the Nazis have small barriers. My chief of staff and I supported the regiment commander. In the current situation, the enemy was retreating. Our main task was to keep on his shoulders all the time, as they say, to keep pressure on him, not to let him come to his senses, and to organize the defense along the whole front. As for the pockets of resistance of Hitlerites on the way to the offensive, we often bypassed them, and it justified itself. The enemy garrisons not having elbow communication with their units, under the constant onslaught of the units left by us, stopped resistance. Based on all this, before making a decision, Valentin Yevstafevich and asked us for advice. Telling about the fighting, I have repeatedly mentioned the name of the regiment commander, Major Pavlyuk. Now I would like to present him to the readers the way this man remained in my memory. Before the war, Valentin Yevstafevich graduated from Podolsk Military School. He experienced the bitterness of our withdrawal and the joy of the first blows on the enemy. He gained command experience in combat not for years, as in peacetime, but by days, and received theoretical knowledge plus practice. Personal qualities allowed him to become a regimental commander in the third year of the war. Perhaps some of the skeptics, after reading these lines, will smile. They say that at the front the advancement is fast. Yes, the loss of officers, especially of platoon, company, battalion and regimental commanders, is great, but after all, the same battle and puts forward the most worthy, capable. In peacetime, diplomas received in a school or academy allow individual comrades for quite a long time to stay, as they say, on the surface, until they are not determined by their abilities. During the war, if one battle will put a man forward, even at the expense of personal bravery, coincidence of circumstances, then another will confirm his ability to lead people at a critical moment. The combat situation does not forgive blunders and mistakes. Leaders have to pay dearly for them. There is a continuous selection, and the rapid advancement at the front of this or that officer, as a rule, justified. In the position of regimental commander Valentin Yevstafevich, some time I had to see from the outside. When I served in the operational department of the division, I became more closely acquainted with him upon my arrival in the regiment, and here he became my immediate superior. During the battles in Ukraine, Poland, and especially on the Dorotkin bridgehead, for which Pavlyuk was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, he showed himself a strong-willed, skillful commander. A solid man, he was able to distinguish the actual moments of battle from the apparent, knew where and when to be. On the night of July 30, following my battalion, he crossed to the left bank of the Vistula. His presence alone gave us confidence in success, and his advice, firmness, determination helped us to withstand the frantic counterattacks of the enemy to expand the bridgehead. A positive quality was his ability to unite the team. He did not tolerate bribing, concessions, forgiveness. Our personal relationships with him, in general, were normal, although sometimes it came to outbursts, which were extinguished by the Chief of Staff of the regiment, Major Nikolai Modi. The fact is that in the character of Valentin Yevstafevich, along with courage, the ability to solve problems sometimes slipped traits of willfulness and unbalanced. He showed insufficient flexibility in his relations with his subordinates. In short, it was a living, normal person with all his strengths and weaknesses. Our regiment was in good standing with the command, although it was headed by people who were a little over 20. We coped successfully with combat tasks, despite the fact that we had to act, as a rule, on the edge. Without bragging, I will say, the commander more than once set us as an example to others. This pleased us, gave us confidence in our strength and capabilities. In the first days of February, the regiment, as part of the division, continued to liberate the right bank of the Oder. Reflecting enemy counterattacks, we were moving closer and closer to the river, from which it was not far to Berlin. Among the soldiers and commanders there was an upswing. Here it is, the nest of fascism, the land that gave birth to the ideology of misanthropy and terrible extermination war, the land cursed by millions of people, a land on which now came just retribution in the person of the Soviet soldier. We rejoiced with all our hearts. At last what we had dreamed of during the long and difficult front roads had come true. One of the days almost ended tragically for me. The regiment was forcing a small river. I was on the bridge and let the units through. A little frost was stinging my face. Suddenly, together with the railing, the planking collapsed. Breaking through the ice, I reached the bottom. However, having pushed off, I jumped out of the hole. My comrades ran up, quickly carried me to a nearby house, heated the stove, dried me off, and gave me a uniform. My strong Siberian health did not fail me. I got off with only a slight fright.
In short breaks between battles, people reached for newspapers and radios. They literally swallowed the messages of Sovnformbier, listened with great attention to political information about the final stage of the Vistula-Oder offensive operation, the participants of which were themselves.
On all parts of the front, there were fierce battles. For several days, parts of the division fought for the towns of Kotlo, Mosswitz, Groschewitz. The enemy defended hard, counter-attacked with superior forces of infantry and tank. Once again, as on the approaches to the southern Bug and on the Vistula, the time was counted not by days, but by attack lines taken settlements. We rested intermittently, took food on the run. The regiment, as they say, was on wheels. Soon the battles unfolded on the outskirts of the fortress city of Glogo. Densely populated area with an extensive network of highways gave great advantages to the enemy. The Nazis adapted basements, lower floors of buildings for defense, had a great opportunity to maneuver forces and means. In threatening areas, they quickly concentrated motorized infantry, artillery, tanks. One night, the regimental headquarters received an order. We were to rush forward to the tankers who had gone ahead. In front along the route of movement was an advanced detachment of Captain Ulyanov's 2nd Battalion. The officer had just reported about the meeting with the enemy. However, through the interference in the air, the communicators did not understand everything from the radiogram. The subscriber did not respond to their request to duplicate the report. Pavlyuk turned to me. Alexander Terentievich, it is necessary to find out what is going on at Ulyanov's. Go to your former farm, sort it out. Take the lead of the advanced detachment. According to calculations, he is on the boundary of the tankers. Contact them. Leaving for a new position, handed the battalion to Captain Ulyanov, recently arrived to us from the post of teacher of the school. He turned out to be a hard-working officer, but did not yet have enough experience. Passing the farm Gospodsky Dvor, I saw tanks on the side of the road. Near the head 30 checker was cluttering the crew. What's the stop for, guys? A tanker in a ribbed helmet came almost right up to our horses and looked at. We're out of fuel, waiting for the refueler, and you're looking for yours, so they've gone ahead. Nothosipchas, how can we find your superiors? What's there to look for? They're close by. The corps commander is in that red wing over there. The tanker nodded at the red brick house. I dismounted, hurried to the house. A man of medium height in a general's cap was hurriedly walking towards me in a chrome raglan. I stopped, put my hand to the cap and introduced myself. We've been waiting for you for a long time, Comrade Major. The commander shook my hand in return. The Krauts are advancing, and we have bad fuel and ammunition. We are suffering losses. Your advanced detachment came into contact with the enemy. Unluckily, as I've just been told, the Germans have pushed the companies back. So the news, as they say, is not pleasant. Having clarified from the general the lines of defense of tankers, I hurried to Ulyanov's battalion. 2 kilometers later, I met a group of our fighters. Towards me stepped a tall sergeant with a company machine gun behind his shoulders and introduced himself as the assistant platoon commander.
The Krauts bypassed. The platoon commander was killed. And here we are.
You grease your heels. I recognize the former machine gunner of the 4th Company on the bridgehead. Where's Brachenko? The company commander with a group of soldiers is covering the withdrawal. The 5th and 6th companies are also withdrawing. I'm reminded of the Gospodsky Yard, tanks on the crest of the heights around it. Together it'll be easier to stop the night. Tell you what, Sergeant, take the platoon to the Lord's Court. It's not far away. Deploy on its outskirts and stop all those retreating. Follow my orders. I didn't have to get off the saddle till morning. Battalion headquarters with a machine gun company found in a small gully. Ulyanov, in a hoarse voice, sent officers to gather people, directed the commander to the Gospodsky door to organize the defense. Before he left, asked how it could happen that the battalion in time did not detect the enemy. It turned out that the head marching outpost was near the main forces. The fascists took advantage of the oversight, scattered the battalion and began to pursue it. The radio went out of order. I did not scold, reprimand the commander and adjutant of the senior battalion for the blunder. They already felt, as they say, out of place. And there was no time for that. It was necessary to gather the battalion as quickly as possible and stop the enemy. I sent a messenger to the regiment headquarters with a report on the situation and joined Ulyanov and tank officers to organize the defense. Hitlerites came to the Lord's Court at dawn. We met them with a dense fire. Tankers set on fire 2 fascist Tigers, gunners, machine gunners and mortars destroyed about a battalion of any infantry. The enemy was thrown back. The commander of the tank corps thanked us for the rescue. This episode remained in my memory as a reminder of the tough resistance of the fascists in those days, as a bitter lesson in the weakening of vigilance. In the course of the fight, about 60 prisoners were captured. A German officer suddenly takes off his watch and offers it to me. I said to throw it away. That scoundrel, I thought, wants to pay off for his sins, grave atrocities committed on Soviet soil. I stomped on the watch. The Hitlerite looked at me in surprise. The prisoners we sent to the rear.
February 4. The regiment approached the suburbs of Glogau. The Nazis in one place and in another began to counterattack the battalion fighting order. We had to temporarily go to the defense. A brutal battle broke out in the area of the Germans towards our rifle companies through tanks and armoured personnel carriers. Regimental artillery has not yet approached. The blow of the armoured fist of the enemy had to take on a company of anti-tank guns of senior level.
The first to meet the enemy was Lieutenant Yakov Todorov's platoon, which intercepted the exit from a narrow hollow. Fascist tanks from long distances opened heavy fire on the defence of the Peterovs. The shells shredded the frozen ground, low shrubbery. Shrapnel squealed. The rumble that shook the air was dull, painful in the ears of the soldiers. Dense smoke rolled down into the lowlands and there settled. The snow lost its original whiteness and, mixed with the crushed earth, turned into a grey mess. In the suffocating smoke, Todorov crawled from one firing position to another, telling his subordinates, "Not a step back, hold on." The calculations did not leave their firing positions. With desperate determination and anger, they were preparing to meet the enemy. In the gaps of eye-eating smoke, the soldiers saw low boxes of tanks approaching. The gunners, choosing the most convenient position, once and again tried on, waiting for the moment to open fire. CM soldiers did not tremble even when the multi-ton vehicles, followed by the infantry, came close. In the observation slits, aim at the side, wheezed Todorov, crawling up to the right flank. Near the firing position there was a wide smoking crater. On its jagged edge, unnaturally tucked under his stomach left leg, frozen carrier. In the corners of the soldier's mouth foamed scarlet. The gunner stumbled into the snow, leaning his shaved head against the stock of his rifle. His helmet lay there. Todorov touched the soldier's hand, called out, Burmistrenko, Oki and Zetulike.
He did not move. The lieutenant took him by the shoulder and pulled him away from the gun. The gunner was dead. Todorov pulled the anti-tank gun to himself, put it on the coulters. He opened a bolt and inserted a cartridge into the barrel. He did everything calmly, without hurrying, in cold fury.
Through the slit of the sight I saw the gun barrel of the Nazi tank. The trunk was swinging in time with the movements of the fighting machine, as if searching for something. Then the slit obscured the side of the machine. The tank turned obliquely, apparently considering the calculation dead. Now for Todorov there was nothing around but the tank. He moved his shoulder up. The tracks of the tracks polished to a shine flashed in the sight, aimed higher in the middle of the side, and pressed the trigger. I didn't hear a shot. A jolt in the shoulder testified to it. He pulled the bolt, fired again, and reached for the bolt again. But then a flame erupted right in front of him. Some unknown force lifted him up, threw him back, covered him with something huge and stuffy. Everything swam and swirled before his eyes. But Todorov was still alive. Spitting out the earth, he raised himself on his elbow, nodded his eyes in the direction of the tank. The enemy vehicle was enveloped in black smoke, ready, and, dropping his head, he lost consciousness. These were the last moments of his life. The company of anti-tank guns suffered heavy losses, but did not miss the enemy until the approach of our artillery. For several days the regiment fought for Neukrans, a suburb of Glogau. The small German town was prepared in advance for defence. Machine guns were installed in the lower floors of the houses, in the basements were Faustnike, in the attics were equipped with machine gunners. It was difficult to break through the tiered dagger fire, even after the suppression of most of the machine gun nests by our artillery. Particularly fierce battles raged for the central part of the city, the church and the cemetery with a metre-high reinforced concrete fence. Artillerymen were hitting at point-blank range at the Hitlerites, but when the rifle companies had to rise, the firing points came to life. Fascist batteries also inflicted great damage on us. We were surprised at the accuracy with which they were hitting our fighting orders, until the regimental scouts found the picks of German adjusters on the dome. Our gunners had to hit the Temple of God. The enemy's artillery fire decreased, and then stopped altogether. Battalions continued to storm the neighbourhoods of New Kranza. The enemy still fiercely resisted. We lost 3 company commanders killed, Senior Lieutenants Grigory Slobodniak, Peter Zharikov and Junior Lieutenant Mikhail Yashkin. Many platoon commanders, sergeants and soldiers fell.
It won't take long to reach a Pyrrhic victory. Why, sighed the regiment commander, when the combatants reported the capture of the last city streets.
By morning the battalions of the regiment broke into the outskirts of Glogau. However, they could not advance further. Fortress walls of the city bristled with artillery and machine gun fire. Company chains lay low, and then were forced to roll back. At this point, the enemy stopped and other regiments. To strengthen the divisions blocking Glogau, the command began to pull up here corps and army reserves. But even this did not bring success. The encircled group of fascists repulsed all attempts of our troops to seize the city. To continue the assault on the fortress walls meant to continue to suffer losses. The commander decided to leave part of the forces to block the fortress and the rest to move to the northwest, in the direction of the mouth of the Boba River. As further events showed, the decision justified itself. Remaining surrounded, the German group was eventually forced to capitulate. It happened some time later. While we were fighting on the approaches and for the town of Glogau, the front troops continued to force the Oder. On February 8, the Lower Silesian operation began. The battles required considerable forces and means. The command hurried us with the crossing to the western bank of the river. Before the forcing of the Oder from the forward observation point, called me Regimental Commander Major Pavlyuk. Just now the commander of the corps announced to the regiment a commendation for the successful clearing of the right bank of the Oder from the enemy, and ordered, without wasting time, to cross the river. On the ferry crossing on the other bank to transfer battalions, mortar men, artillery, rear to send to the detour. Almost immediately a combat order to force the crossing arrived from the division headquarters.
We thought about it. Pavlyuk nodded towards Major Modin. We decided to entrust you, Alexander Terentievich, to lead the column of the rear of the regiment. Take into account that we will need ammunition and food on the other shore very soon.
We clarified the route of movement. The road was not a long one, over 100 kilometers to the surviving bridge on the Oder, and the same amount from there. Meanwhile, the deputy commander of the regiment on supply, Captain Pachka, was preparing his farm for the march. An hour and a half later, the automobile and caterpillar column was on its way. The bank of the Oder was packed with troops. Infantrymen, artillerymen, tankers, sappers, signallers, mortarmen, special purpose units. There was no one to meet on the coastal roads. Cars, motorcycles, wagons rolled by. Sometimes they were confiscated in the ancient estates that happened to be on the way of our troops, old carriages of such a shape that the soldiers only aghast, marvelling at the imagination of the master. No matter how much my worries overwhelmed me, I involuntarily smiled when from the window of such a carriage, instead of a pretty face of some panny, looked out a brave mustachioed face. Such a picture evidently caused salty soldier jokes, because there was an explosion of merry laughter of soldiers walking along the roadside. Reserves and rear units were coming up, piling up despite the vigorous work of the commandant's office. Everyone needed to get to the other side urgently. We had to break through the congestion at the crossroads, to enter into conversations with regulators, to beg them to let the column pass. Despite all our efforts, we were moving slowly. Automobiles had to wait for horse-drawn wagons every now and then. On the second day, the horses began to get tired. We began to give them rest more and more often. So, Nikolai Vasilievich, we will get, as they say, to a hat trick. I could not stand it during one of the breaks. Captain Pachka shrugged his shoulders and joked unhappily. That's our plan, rear men. A horse is not a machine. It gets tired and needs to eat.
Well, let's go, Nikolai Vasilievich. The second day is running out. Battalions and batteries are fighting. The regiment must be out of ammunition. They're waiting for us.
Of course they're waiting for us. My father's going to bite us again. But what can we do? Pachka sighed heavily, turned to the riders standing next to him. Hurry up your beaters. We are dragging like at a funeral, guys. In a few minutes we were on our way again. I continued to worry about ammunition. It's no joke. The regiment doesn't receive ammunition. They were waiting for us there. At the next halt I called Pachka too. Now I've decided to reload the ammunition onto the vehicles and march to the regiment. You'll stay with the rest of the equipment. You'll arrive later. Understood, Comrade Major. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring some food. Although the men have been given dry rations, but who knows how it turned out. Take some. All right, load it up. What a thing, Pachka said excitedly. He ran along the column, giving orders to the people accompanying the cargo. In about 30 minutes, the cars were ready to move. He said goodbye to Nikolai Vasilievich, sympathizing with him. That's it, sighed Pachka. You've learned what the rear is like. You've seen how we sometimes get it. Maybe you will be less reproachful now. In the labyrinth of roads on the left bank of the Oder, it was not easy to find the regiment, especially since they were packed to the limit with troops of our army. At first I found the corps headquarters. There I was oriented where the division was. The rest, as they say, was a matter of technique and punching power at numerous road crossroads, especially since I already had experience. Finally, met Major Modin on the outskirts of one of the German villages. We were beginning to worry whether we had gotten lost in this Babylonian pandemonium. You can worry here. The regiment commander came up to us. Ammunition is running out, the Krauts are still snapping at us, and you vanished into thin air. We had to leave the truck transport, Valentin Yevstafevich, I explained. Captain Pachka is in charge of the convoy. He was right to decide to send forward cars with ammunition. Didn't you bring any groceries? Because yesterday fascist aviation went through the battalion rear. Yes, of course I brought it. No, thank you for that. The regiment commander rushed to the voice of the duty officer. The chief of artillery supply appeared with a group of fighters, started unloading cars. With Modin went to the headquarters tent. Nikolai Sergeyevich outlined to me the situation. The division broke through the enemy defences and on the move seized a number of settlements. However, the enemy soon came to his senses. It took a few hours for the 828th and 862nd Rifle Regiments to seize the small town of Brashen. Since morning, the division commander is preparing to put our regiment into battle. Now calls to himself at the NP regimental commanders. Pavlyuk, I thought he was pale from fatigue and lack of sleep. The doctor forbade him to leave the tent, but how can you keep him out? He heard you'd arrived and came out to greet you, so I guess one of us will have to go to the commander. Probably you, though you've had a lot of time on your hands. I see, Nikolai Sergeyevich. Having washed up quickly from the road, I went to the regiment commander's office. Valentin Yevstafevich, his orderly, met him with word. Welcome, Comrade Major. The commander is waiting for you. He ordered me to bring him up as soon as you arrived. Pavlyuk was lying on the camp bed, covered with a half-coat. No, I'm awake. Come in, Sasha. He got up, threw his dungaree over his shoulders, came to the table. You should have a rest, but the situation is such that I can't give it to you. I have to go to the commander to get the task. The temperature, be damned, is shaking me. Pavlyuk showed on the map the location of the division command post, advised how best to get there. We talked about the available forces of the regiment. Valentin Yevstafevich, has Bukharin not returned? I inquired. No, he is still at Glogo. Our troops are stuck there. They can't drive the Krauts out of the fortress, and we need the battalion. We need it. In all probability, we'll move on Guben. They say it's a tough nut to crack. The Krauts have prepared the suburbs and the city for defense. So much for a couple of days. I remembered the telephone conversation with the commander before the round of the city. The second 10 went. Leaping ahead, I will say, the battalion showed itself well in the performance of the task. In the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief among the commanders of distinguished units in the liberation of the city was named Nikolai Yakovlevich's name. I was sincerely pleased with this message. Accompanied by an orderly and machine gunners, I went to the division KP. Take some newspapers with you, advised Modine. At your leisure, read Pravda from February 13, although the issue is 5 days old, but it contains material about the Crimean Conference. All right. Nikolai Sergeyevich, I'll start with it. I reached the division CP safely. I reported to Colonel Kantaria about my arrival. Ivan Grigorievich said hello, asked about the well-being of the regiment commander. Until other unit commanders arrive, free to go. Stay here not far away. Went under the crowns of trees, where our horses were tied, and folded the newspaper. In the message from the Crimean Conference of the Heads of Government of Great Britain, the United States and the USSR was about the capture of Berlin, the conditions of unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany, the distribution of zones of occupation, touched on other issues of post-war organization, in particular the border with Poland. Being engrossed in the newspaper, I did not pay attention to the fascist airplanes that appeared over the forest. Even when they were hit by twin anti-aircraft machine guns, I continued reading, and only the whistle of the bombs tore me away from the newspaper, forced me, as usual, to duck into a gap opened by someone. Anticipating danger, the horses rumbled anxiously. The ground trembled and shook. The rumble of the explosion drowned out the voices of the horsemen. Shrapnel roared. The shock wave travelled along the limbs, breaking the pines. Jumping to his feet, he glanced at the site of the explosions. Fresh craters were smoking. One of the bombs lay near the place where he had just talked to the commander. Some subconscious anxious feeling pricked in his heart. I rushed there. Branches of bushes whipped on the shins of boots, tore the hollow of overcoat, knocked on the hands and face. Here was the command post. Half-filled trenches, passages of communication, a torn crater from a large-caliber aerial bomb. Directly in front of me appeared a human figure in an overcoat slashed on the back, through which blood flowed. Staggering, the fighter took a step to the side and lay down in the snow. Nearby, a second soldier wiggled and groaned. Where is the commander? A thought flashed through my mind. Right here I was talking to him. One jumped into the gap. Colonel Kantaria was lying face up in the corner. He was moaning softly. Comrade Colonel, what's the matter with you? Wounded. The commander opened his eyes. Pained. Without long thinking, he picked up Ivan Grigorievich under his arms and carefully carried him to the exit. My chest hurts. It burns, Kantaria whispered. The doctor, someone's voice sounded. A doctor. People were running towards us from different directions. Yelled, wounded? The trench coat, someone shouted. Bring the tent over here. I put the commander down on the tent. I unbuttoned his coat, followed by his tunic. Without thinking, I tore off his sweater, exposing his chest. Blood flowed from the wound. He unzipped his field bag, fumbled for his individual bag. But then the medics came running. During the dressing, Colonel Kantaria died. Ivan Grigorievich was a brave soldier. His life is connected with the army. In the 1920s, he voluntarily joined the Red Army. He took part in the suppression of counter-revolutionary rebellions in Transcaucasia. After the Civil War, he continued to serve in the army, studied, gained experience. From the first months of the Great Patriotic War, he participated in the leadership of combat operations on the Crimean Peninsula. He defended the Greater Caucasus Ridge. At the head of the 253rd Infantry Division, liberated Lvivshchina. Death tore Ivan Grigorievich from the ranks of fighters, but he remained in the memory of the people. One of the streets of Lviv and the museum of the city school bear Kantaria's name. On the tomb of the brave son of the Georgian people in Lviv on the Hill of Glory there is a slab. We swore to avenge the German fascist invaders for his death. In the evening of the same day, the regiments captured the fork of railroads on the way to the Nisa River. Some time later, General Danilovsky returned to the division. Fyodor Semyonovich was leaving us for promotion. In the position of corps commander, he often came to us. By the time of Kantaria's death, his former commander, General Donsko, arrived in the corps and ordered Danilovsky to lead the orphan division again. We were sincerely glad of this. Fyodor Semyonovich was highly respected by us. He was a widely educated man both in general and in military terms. He graduated from the Leningrad Infantry School, commanded an armored train and units. Behind his shoulders were Frunze Military Academy, experience of practical work in the troops. High theoretical training, versatile commanding experience. Practice in combat operations made him a knowledgeable commander of high rank. Stamina, energetic, strong-willed, he had the ability to unite the team that surrounded him, which he commanded. Strict but fair, he fully inquired for the slightest omission. He did not tolerate slackness, swagger, and arrogance. He was able to stand up for his subordinate, was not afraid to take the blame if he saw that an officer or a soldier made a mistake by accident or ignorance. He was correct, simple in dealing with people. Officers, sergeants, and soldiers came to him for advice and help. He spared no time to build up the staff, training officers. More than once I saw how painstakingly prepared the commander to conduct this or that class and demanded the same from others. Before the offensive necessarily visited the site of the attack, clarified with commanders, scouts, observers, the system of enemy fire, its engineering barriers, interested in the behavior of the enemy, he came back to the NP tired, but satisfied. On the warnings of the chief of the political department say, so not long to pay with their lives, usually divorced his hands. That's true, but I'm a commander. I'll lead the men into battle. I'm responsible for each of them, and it's better to see it once than to hear it 7 times from others. And as for getting killed, I'm an old soldier. I'm as careful as I can be. I stay out of the way. Danilovsky was a fearless man, but not prone to ostentatious bravery. If the situation dictated, appeared where it was necessary. His restraint and energetic measures instilled confidence in others, thus influencing the course of battle. For all this, Fyodor Semyonovich, we not only deeply respected, but also sincerely loved. But let's return to those days. For several days we fought for the suburbs of Guben. By fierceness and persistence they resembled one another. About a day the regiment stormed the small town of Grosvenor. Especially much trouble was caused to us by batteries of 105 mm guns. The fascists had prepared several positions for them in advance. Steep trenches, dugouts dressed in concrete, regimental artillery and snipers fought with them. A difficult situation developed on the eastern outskirts of Grosvenor. Fascists several times counterattacked the junction of battalions, which was covered by machine gunners of Lieutenant Titov. Hitlerites managed to cut off several calculations headed by the company command. Surrounded machine gunners fought to the last cartridge. In this battle, Lieutenant Titov died a death of the brave. I knew Ivan Fedorovich from the battles at Ozdutykh, Lesny, Kalup, Dorotka. He was a communist officer who knew no fear. On the Dorotka bridgehead, left alone at the machine gun, more than 2 hours in a row held off the onslaught of Hitlerites. For this battle he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. In October of the 44th took a machine gun company. For a short time of our rest he managed to build up a team. He distinguished himself many times during the Vistula Order operation, and now he was gone. With the support of aviation and tankers of the 3rd Tank Brigade, Grosvenor was taken. The next day the regiment captured the village of Luxembourg, 10 kilometers from the eastern outskirts of Guben. The battle for the settlement lasted several hours. The Nazis desperately resisted, and only the exit to the rear of the enemy group of Captain Igor Goyuv decided the outcome of the battle. The Nazis, fearing encirclement, withdrew to the city. In this battle, Adjutant Senior Battalion Golubev died. The prisoners, as one showed that from day to Hitlerites should come reinforcements. Indeed, soon in our field of vision were units of the Sapper Battalion and then parts of the SS Division Great Germany, with which we later had to fight. Fighting off numerous enemy counterattacks, we continued to advance stubbornly towards Guben. On February 22, 862nd Vladimir Volinsky Regiment took possession of Forstadt. On the same day, our battalions reached the urban outskirts of Guben and broke into the cemetery, where they were met with dagger fire of the enemy. The night passed in fierce fighting. The fascists tried to throw us back. However, they failed to achieve their goal, and in some places even had to withdraw under the onslaught of our units. The sun came out and illuminated the neighborhoods of Guben. It was a short walk to them, but these hundreds of meters we had to pass under hurricane fire. On February 23, we listened to the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief in connection with the 27th anniversary of the Red Army, which summarized the results of the winter offensive of the Soviet troops. The enemy's defense was broken from the Baltic to the Carpathians. Our armies advanced from the border of East Prussia to the lower reaches of the Vistula, from the bridgehead on the Vistula south of Warsaw to the lower reaches of the Oder, by 570 km, from the Sandomir bridgehead deep into German Silesia, by 480 km. The successes made each of us proud. How could not admire the fact that the troops of the front, only during the Lower Silesian offensive operation, advanced more than 200 km and south of Goben reached the Neisse River, as the enemy's plans to gain a foothold on the Oder River were thwarted. We were congratulated on the holiday and wished success in the final defeat of the Nazi invaders by the Military Council of the Army, Corps and Division commanders. In the leadership of the division has recently changed. Colonel Ivan Pavlovich Belousov arrived at the post of Deputy Commander of the division. There have been changes in the regiments. The 828th Vladimir Volinsky was now commanded by Major Alexander Prokhorovich Zabaznov, and the 862nd, Major Evgeny Ivanovich Nikulin, instead of Nikolai Afanasyevich Kuryabin, who had been seconded for training. Major Arseny Petrovich Shestyankin arrived as deputy commander of our regiment in political affairs, with whom I had established warm relations. On the day of the holiday, he and I decided to go to the front line. The fascists were constantly counterattacking, trying to knock the regiment out of the cemetery. Arseny Petrovich, of short stature, agile, when leaving the headquarters. Alexander Terentьevich, will you go to the 1st or to the 2nd Battalion? Of course, to the 2nd. After all, it's my family. On such a day it would be a shame not to shake hands with veterans. Not many of them are left, those guys with whom I fought on the bridgehead. What can you do, war? It doesn't spare. Every day it takes away someone who has become close to you. The more precious are the remaining ones, Arseny Petrovich. I understand you. Go to the 2nd one. No, let's go to the regimental mortars first. At the position of the battery of 120 mortars, there was combat work going on. The numbers of the regiment, wearing only gymnasiers, from which the steam was wafting, were working at the mortars. Fritz, get a present. The commander of the middle squadron shook a flag clutched in his hand through the air. The loader pulled the cord. A shot rang out deafeningly. It was followed by a second, third. Stop, write down the settings. Followed the command of the senior officer at the firing position. A young officer, who had just arrived in the regiment from the accelerated courses of the school, ran up to us, put his hand to his headdress, and began to report in an unstrengthened bass voice. No need. I stopped him. We can see what the battery is doing. Senior Lieutenant Ponomarev is at the station. Yes, sir, readily answered the officer and pointed to a half-destroyed pickaxe visible in the distance. It's a pity, I burst out. I would have liked to see you. Most of the officers of the battalion landed on the Dorotkin bridgehead on the night of July 30. In the regiment remained now, except for me, only Ponomarev and Bukharin. But the fewer people who left the bridgehead on the Vistula, the more we were drawn to each other. That's how man works. Friendship forged by fire becomes stronger and brighter with time. And you want to share joy and sorrow with the people closest to you. Today was an unusual day. In the morning I dropped by the medical unit and heartily congratulated Marina. On this festive day I wanted to see my closest friends, but Bukharin was still far away, and Ponomarev was not found at the firing position. I had to limit myself to a short telephone conversation. The officer gathered the soldiers in the firing position. We congratulated them on the holiday, read the telegrams received to the regiment, wished the battery new combat successes. Arseny Petrovich Zesikankin informed the soldiers and commanders about the latest events on the fronts of the Great Patriotic War. Mortarmen listened attentively. It was not hard to guess from their faces, hardened by frost and winter winds, how happy they were with the good news and, of course, with the fact that the war was coming to an end. The opinion of the comrades was expressed by Sergeant Nazar Kramskoy. It is necessary to finish with fascists faster, do everything in our power to defeat them and return home this spring. Mothers, wives, relatives and friends, work are waiting for us. Remember destroyed towns, villages, hulks of factories and plants, abandoned fields. The sergeant looked at his comrades. I mean this, a man is born to beautify the earth, not to destroy what was created before you. Otherwise you will be cursed not only by your generation, but also by your descendants. Death to the German invader. Machinery to battle. Interrupted the conversation with the voice of the telephonist. The men rushed to the mortars. The Germans went into counterattack. In total that day, the regiment repelled 6 counterattacks. The 4th I met in the 2nd Battalion, Captain Ulyanov, having let the enemy close, put the enemy infantry on the snow with flank machine gun fire. The fascists scattered and rushed back. A favourable situation was created, on the shoulders of the Germans retreating in panic to break into the house at the edge of the cemetery. I turned to the commander. Ulyanov apparently also thought about it. Attack. Raise the men. We'll miss the moment. Next to me stood the liaison with the regimental headquarters Staff Sergeant Garbers, a medium-height, smashing, about 18 years old boy. Vladimir had been wounded the day before, but he flatly refused to go to the infirmary. Give me? I stretched out my hand to the machine gun. The senior sergeant looked at me with surprise, but gave the weapon with the words, "And what about me, comrade major? What will I fire with?" "Here, keep it for the duration of the battle." I handed him the gun. At that time rockets flew up. The companies rose to the attack. The Russian hurrah was heard. Company chains were soon hidden behind trees, cemetery fences and monuments. Battalion step by step pushed the Germans. With combat, Ulyanov moved closer to the companies. In the depths of old alleys which had kept silence for decades, human figures flashed, shots, explosions of grenades, shouts were heard. The battles were fought at the graves, between the trees, around the family crypt. The battalion slowly moved forward step by step. We had to move assault groups to one place and another, maneuvering forces and firepower. Despite all our efforts, we could not break the resistance of the enemy. Only the next day, in the evening, the company of Senior Lieutenant German Bratchenko approached the opposite fence of the cemetery. The soldiers had only 150 meters to overcome. To the place of the indicated breakthrough of Ulyanov's battalion, the Germans pulled infantry. Bratchenko reported the preparation of the Nazis to counterattack. With a group of machine gunners made their way to him. The enemy accumulated at a small chapel. "So to a company of Krauts, comrade major," reported the senior lieutenant who turned out from behind the gravestone. But I already seen the enemy myself. The Germans have not yet turned around. Just a favourable moment to strike. Miss Lashter thought. The fate of a battle is often decided by surprise. The Krauts are talking, smoking, rather intuitively than consciously. I raised the automatic rifle above me and exhaled with all the strength of my lungs. For the motherland, be forward. The call was immediately taken up by German Bratchenko's men. We rushed towards the enemy, and so rapidly that the fascists were confused for a moment. From suddenly appeared before them Soviet soldiers, friendly hurrah and dense fire Hitlerites turned back. That even more strengthened our impulse. "Man, do not stop," I shouted Bratchenko on the move. To the fence and then to the houses. Our rush succeeded. On the shoulders of the enemy burst into a 4-story apartment building next to the cemetery. Quite quickly we cleared the basement and the first floor from Hitlerites. But from the upper floors and from the roof we beat them out till late at night. Here my machine gun had to work too. True, for personal participation in the attack, after I heard a reproach of Major Pavliuk, but this is a private matter. As the protracted fighting began, the enemy continuing to hold the central, western and northern parts of the cemetery, urban areas continuously counterattacked parts of the division. During February 24, we advanced only 150 meters. The enemy, not counting any losses, continuously threw reinforcements to the garrison. In the last days of February, prisoners were taken from the reserve battalion, which arrived from Vienna, and a few days later, from the 275th Infantry Division, transferred from under Forst. The access to the Neisse and its forcing Soviet troops opened the way to the heart of the Reich, Berlin. That is why the enemy so clung to this natural boundary, using for defense the possibilities of densely populated area on the east bank of the Neisse. But it was only an attempt to delay the agony. The command of the division corps, army did everything to seize Guben faster. Regrouping forces and firepower, it in one place or another created an advantage over the enemy, trying to break a hole in his defense. The regiment had to take the defense area of neighbors, 106th Infantry Division, transferred to a new direction. We were reinforced with tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery. A separate machine gun battalion was attached. However, the advance was slow. True, on February 27, several assault groups broke through to the Neisse, but it was not possible to gain a foothold, had to withdraw under the pressure of crossfire of the enemy. Especially fierce struggle unfolded for the central part of the city. For several days, having seized the lower floors of buildings, companies tried to knock the Germans out of the upper floors. The enemy fought for every apartment. The tension of the fighting reminded me something of the Dorotkin bridgehead. Both sides did not want to give up an inch of land. By mid-March, the shortage of personnel became acute. Major General Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky reported to the corps commander. The division suffered heavy losses in manpower, especially the 889th Rifle Regiment, which was left with 120 men on 2 km of the front. There are no reserves. I ask for your order to reduce the front line. Indeed, the companies of the regiment were left with 15-20 men, and this taking into account the fact that they received people from the rear units. We continued to fight street battles. I was irremovably on the front line. I had to see a lot. I had to endure a lot. Day and night merged together and were measured not by minutes and hours, but by entrances, apartments, floors taken from the enemy, counterattacks repulsed. In my memory remained such an episode. Somewhere in the 20th days of March, we captured several houses. In the morning, they brought a prisoner to Mr. Officer, he says in broken Russian. I did not shoot. Are you a Pole? I ask him. Yes. And he shows me a pouch full of magazines. We don't want to fight you. The Germans are forcing us. If you don't want to fight, come over to our side. So the prisoner nodded in agreement. We let the boy go. He brought 3 more soldiers. Not from a good life, I realized the fascists moved Poles to the front line. They are exhausted. Usually Hitlerites use them on rear works. One day the call of the regiment commander found me in the 2nd Battalion. Having occupied the first floor of a huge residential building, we were smoking out the enemy from the upper floors for the 2nd day. Valentin Yevstafevich listened to the report, then said, "Listen, there is good news for you here." And our telephone conversation was interrupted by enemy fire. The fascists went on a counterattack. I never found out what Pavlyuk wanted to say. For the next few days there was no time to talk. We barely had time to repel the onslaught of Hitlerites. I began to forget about the news that Valentin Evstafevich wanted to tell me, as he called me again and ordered me to come to him urgently. I did not explain the reason for the call and hung up the phone. Having said goodbye to my comrades, I went to the regiment headquarters. I had to wander through the labyrinth of cellars before I got through a break in the wall to the neighbouring street, where it was safer. True, bullets were squealing overhead, and they could ricochet, but all was well. Valentin Yevstafevich met me cordially. Finally, you make me worry about you. I call, the commander says we're gone. I ask if he has not appeared here, all answer that they have not seen. Major Pavlyuk gave me a squinted look and with a lift in his voice continued. Now for the main thing. Rejoice, Sasha. You're going to study, and not somewhere, but in Moscow. Here's a telegram. You're enrolled in the accelerated course at Franz Academy. The news was so unexpected that I was completely confused. My thoughts were swarming and confused in my head. I did not even know whether to rejoice or not at such a turn of fate, especially since I had already mentally decided I would finish the war with the regiment, and then it would be seen where to put my strength. Apparently my distraught look, bewilderment surprised the commander. Don't you believe it? Read it yourself. The Duke held out a telegram. I began to read it automatically. The regiment commander couldn't stand it, he asked. Or Sasha not happy? No, I can't gather my thoughts. It's all so sudden. Friedman, Zeshyankin, regimental engineer Otushenikov. Other officers came and began to congratulate. What only wishes did not happen to me to hear for a few minutes.
Gatherings were short, the deadlines specified in the telegram. Hurried! I threw my bachelor's belongings into a suitcase, said goodbye to my comrades in the regiment, and dropped by the medics. Marina was in place.
Leaving, Marina.
How are you leaving? Transferred. Where? The girl's eyes darkened.
Going to study, Marina. That's good. Holding back her feelings, she bit her lip. That's what I think. I'll finish my studies and come here to our Bryansk Red Banner. Will you wait for me? I will.
I hugged the girl.
The regiment commander put a motorcycle at my disposal, reminded me that I should stop by the division headquarters on the way. Colonel Abashev asked you to see him before you leave. Major General Danilovsky was recently transferred from us to the post of corps commander. The duties of the division commander were again performed by Fyodor Fedorovich Abashev.
The division headquarters was located in a small German village. I was met by the duty senior lieutenant, Zaparevani. Mikhail Gavrilovich had transferred from the regiment to the operational division a few months ago. Several times we met with him in preparation for battles.
Is Colonel Abashev in? Yes, he's already inquired about you.
Fezda Fedorovich hugged me tightly. He smiled when I asked him the reason for the summons. I wanted to see you, Sasha, before leaving for the academy, to thank you for your service.
Abashev invited the head of the political department of the division, Colonel Zhivago, and in his presence he continued the conversation, giving it a touch of officialism. He called me a veteran, reminded me that in the division I grew in rank and position, was awarded the highest honor of the motherland, became a hero of the Soviet Union. It's a pity to part. Fyodor Fedorovich continued sincerely. But life is life. The army needs highly trained officers. That's why we see you off, Alexander Terentyevich, with joy. Study, gain knowledge.
And come back to us after the academy. Colonel Zhivago completed his thought. We will be waiting for you. Warmly and kindly greeted me bosses. From the bottom of my heart, I thanked them for their help in my formation as a commander, for their trust.
I left the division for the army headquarters. In the personnel department of our 3rd Guards, I found a former colleague from the regiment, Siberian Captain Efim Ivanov. He helped me to finalize the documents, escorted me to the railway station.
The train took me to the east. The wheels of the wagon rattled, the horn of the locomotive wheezed, long calling, causing longing and joy. Longing, because I became close to the restless regimental family and the harsh front. I became close to the people with whom I walked the fiery roads of war. That is why parting with my comrades in arms is painful in my heart. Anxious joy, because there is a new, not yet really realized life ahead, a life without blood and death. After Poland, the Belarusian forests stretched behind the window, war-wounded villages, station settlements, towns and cities flashed by. The war accompanied me inexorably. Through the canopy of settled snow one could see the wounds of the earth. Trenches, passages, trenches, funnels, destroyed pillboxes and bunkers, burnt houses, mangled railroad cars, steam locomotives with gaping lacerations on their sides, and broken military equipment floated by and
especially many tanks, armoured personnel carriers, self-propelled units. Guns were scattered on the approaches to cities, large settlements, at railway bridges and crossings. The tortured face of the earth touched the heart, and the gaunt, exhausted people in cotton coats and pre-war clothes aroused pity. At stops, children ran to the cars. We gave them bread, canned food, sugar, whatever was at hand.
Women who had borne the weight of the front years looked at us with hope. They were waiting for changes, for a strong male hand in the destroyed cities and villages dilapidated during the war.
However, in the appearance of the land, although rarely, but there was a new look. Log cabins of unfinished buildings, fresh bricklaying. The first signs of creation, new sprouts of peaceful life evoked a sense of pride, truly inexhaustible strength of the people. Almost 4 years of the most destructive war in the history of mankind are behind us. The main force is still at the fronts, and here in the rear, the battle with the consequences of the war hardship is already unfolding.
My thoughts take me to the front roads and bring me back to today. Telegraph poles glimmer behind the car window. Fields, forests, rivers are passing by. The expanses of the motherland. You are no longer trampled by the enemies. We have won, though still the shots rumble on the Soviet-German front. But this is the agony of war. Not today, not tomorrow. The Third Reich will fall. Involvement in the defeat of the enemy fills the heart with happiness and brings thought. What helped us to defeat the monstrous spawn of imperialism? German fascism. The fortitude of the spirit of the Russian people, its inexhaustible strength. Yes, throughout the centuries-long history of the Russian state, he did not. The valor of the Russian warrior has long been firmly known to the whole world. Harsh nature of Russia, which Hitler's generals referred to after the defeat at Moscow and Stalingrad. No, the course of the war showed. They were beaten in winter and summer, day and night. The point is different. We were defending the motherland, our Soviet power, the social and state system born in the Great October. It has entered our flesh and blood. It is close and dear to every Soviet person. We could not imagine ourselves without it.
Our social and state system, the planned system, allowed in a short time to transfer the country's economy to the war economy. At the beginning of the war, we lost highly developed industrial regions, fertile lands of Ukraine and the North Caucasus. It was the hardest blow, and not every country would have recovered from it. Our people, our national economy, and in these conditions were able to provide the army with equipment, weapons, uniforms, and later re-equip with the latest types of weapons and equipment.
With each month of the war, our firepower increased. Frontline soldiers rejoiced at the appearance of new systems of guns, tanks, airplanes and their number. During the battles, we did not feel the lack of ammunition. I will not enumerate the numbers and names of weapons, combat vehicles, military equipment produced during the war years.
It is well described in the military historical literature. I will only emphasize the following. Everything we used to smash the enemy did not fall from the sky. It was created by the hands of a Soviet man, a hard worker and a fighter who gave his all for the victory, and it is understandable. During the 5-year period, our social and state system not only created a powerful industry, transferred agriculture to the socialist way, but also brought up a new man, a man citizen, with a capital letter. I remember Zakhar Petrovich Romanov. He was a participant of the First World War, Cavalier of St. George, non-partisan. He volunteered for the active army. He managed to get sent to the front line, even though the years were long gone. He fought well. For distinctions in fights, he was awarded with Orders of the Red Star, Glory of the II degree. Other soldiers and sergeants of his age fought in our rifle regiment, and how many there were fighters who added a year or even 2 to beat the fascists with a weapon in their hands. And our rear, women, old men, children took on their shoulders the work of husbands, brothers, sons and fathers who had gone to the front.
The calculation of fascist bosses that at the first blows our multinational state would crumble failed. The deadly danger looming over the motherland united the peoples and nationalities of the Soviet Union even more. Lenin's voluntary union of nations withstood all the trials of war.
Russians and Ukrainians, Belarusians and Kazakhs, Georgians and Armenians, Latvians and Lithuanians, Chuvashians and Mordvins, all inhabitants of the 6th part of our planet, called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, considered the fight against the enemy as their common cause, did everything for victory. The words of the company's party commander, Senior Lieutenant Emmanuel Shalaganidze, will never fade from my memory. We could have been born on the land of Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, but we have only one homeland, the Soviet Union. Remember it, and defend it to the last drop of blood. The people will not forget your deeds of war in the name of the fatherland. The decisive condition for our victory over the enemy was the leadership of the Communist Party by the army and the people. In a difficult hour for the motherland, the party, guided by Leninist ideas about the protection of the socialist fatherland, acted as the inspirer and organizer of the Soviet people's struggle against Nazi Germany. I remember the first months of the war, political fighters. They came from machines, from collective farm fields, rose from the mines. In the most difficult time, the initial period of the war, they cemented our ranks with the party word. Personal example gave people confidence in the victory over the enemy. Many political fighters later became excellent political workers.
I bow before the commissars. How much they had to experience and endure. People of high duty, they were the first to stand up in the attack, throwing the cry communists forward. To the last stood in defense and, if there was an order to retreat, retreated last.
Panchenko, Stadnyok, Stolnikov, Ilagin, Nikolaev, Kulyabin, Zhevago, Zestyankin, the names of political workers, with whom the front roads brought me together, can be enumerated further. These are people of high duty and generous soul, people of crystal clear conscience. I took an example from them, equaled them in the combat life. The wheels of the wagons clattered on the joints of the rails. Soldiers, sergeants, officers, returning for one reason or another from the front, looked greedily at the pictures of peaceful life, not hiding, rejoiced at the approaching end of the war, as only people who had been in its crucible, forever burned by its breath, can rejoice. We left the front with the hope to work and study. We rejoiced that we had won, dreamed of the future, but the faces of my companions grew gloomy. I remembered my comrades in arms. How are they there on the roads of war? This thought did not give rest to me. With joy and pride, I learned that the regiment at the final stage of the war for its military deeds was awarded the honorary name of Dresden, and for the storming of Berlin. The gratitude of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief finished its combat journey at the walls of Prague. Majors Valentin Yevstafevich Pavlyuk and Nikolai Sergeyevich Modin, who came to study at the Franz Academy in the fall, told me about it.